They say blood is thicker than water, but I learned it can be colder than ice. Picture being 8 months pregnant, standing inside an isolated mountain cabin, while your own mother locks every door. They did not want my money or my life. They wanted the unborn child growing inside me to cover up a $50 million lie. What they never realized was that the prey they cornered was actually the hunter spinning the final web. Hello, and welcome back to the loyal listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has disabled monetization on our channel, leaving us without the necessary budget to keep operating. If you find yourself captivated by today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our dedicated team can afford their living expenses and continue bringing these stories to life. You can easily donate by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the video description and comments. My name is Lennon Carr. I am 29 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life building a fortress of independence. I work as a risk data analyst at Vanguard Apex Solutions, a highly classified, private security corporation hidden in the bustling heart of downtown Denver, Colorado. Most people have never heard of my company, and that is exactly the point. My daily routine involves sifting through digital footprints, identifying anomalies, and anticipating worst-case scenarios for high-net-worth clients. I was trained to see the hidden threats in every situation, a skill that ironically stemmed from my own upbringing. While my professional life was built on calculating risks, my personal life was my sanctuary. I am married to Wyatt, an architectural engineer whose quiet, grounded nature is the perfect counterbalance to my high-stress career. Wyatt is the kind of man who speaks softly but builds foundations that last lifetimes. For years, we worked tirelessly, saving every penny to construct our dream home on the outskirts of the city. He views me as his entire world, and stepping into our house every evening felt like walking into a warm, impenetrable embrace, far away from the cold reality of my past. To understand the chill in my bloodline, you have to look back at the shadow I lived in for decades. Growing up, I was little more than a ghost haunting the hallways of my family home. My mother, Eleanor, poured every ounce of her love, financial resources, and soaring expectations into my older sister, Harper. Harper was raised as an absolute queen, conditioned to believe the world existed merely to cater to her whims. She possessed an agonizingly selfish nature and a habit of reckless, lavish spending that my mother always eagerly enabled. I was just the spare part, the quiet girl sitting in the corner while Harper danced in the spotlight. Naturally, Harper's towering entitlement led her to what my mother considered the ultimate prize. She married Julian Vance, the sole heir to a staggering real estate dynasty. Their wedding was a spectacular display of wealth, cementing Harper's status in high society. However, her perfect facade soon cracked under the weight of a devastating reality. Years of a reckless, dangerously wild lifestyle in her youth had taken an irreversible toll on her body. Following a series of exhaustive medical evaluations, Harper was diagnosed as completely infertile. There would be no Vance heir naturally born from her, a fact that threatened her golden ticket. Meanwhile, in my quiet, modest world, Wyatt and I were fighting our own battle. For 3 grueling years, we prayed, hoped, and endured the quiet heartbreak of negative pregnancy tests. Then, the miracle we had been dreaming of finally arrived. We were ecstatic to discover I was pregnant, and the joy only multiplied when we found out we were having a little girl. It was the happiest moment of my life. I naively thought that new life might bridge the canyon between my family and me. I picked up the phone, my voice trembling with excitement, and called my mother to share the joyous news. I expected a basic level of human warmth, perhaps a tentative congratulation. Instead, I was met with a chilling, detached silence. Following that brief, awkward phone call, both my mother and Harper completely severed all contact. For 7 agonizing months, they acted as if I had ceased to exist. Not a single text message, not one phone call to check on the baby, nothing. At first, the rejection stung deeply, reopening old childhood wounds. I cried into Wyatt's shoulder for days, but as my belly grew rounder and my baby's kicks grew stronger, that sorrow hardened into a fierce, protective resolve. I finally accepted that they were strangers who happened to share my DNA, and I made the firm decision to erase them from my life forever, focusing solely on the beautiful family I was about to bring into the world. Behind the heavily guarded gates of the Vance estate, a vicious storm was quietly brewing. The patriarch of the family had laid down a brutal, non-negotiable ultimatum written in ironclad legal terms. Julian, Harper's husband, would only be granted access to his massive trust fund, an astronomical sum valued at exactly $50 million, under one strict condition. They had to produce a legitimate, biological heir carrying the Vance bloodline. Adoption was strictly prohibited by the archaic, centuries-old clauses of the family trust. For my sister, whose past decisions had rendered her completely infertile, this ultimatum was a death sentence to her lavish lifestyle. It meant watching $50 million slip permanently through her manicured fingers. But my mother and Harper were never women who accepted defeat gracefully. Instead of conceding to biological reality, they orchestrated a deception so staggering it bordered on absolute lunacy. Harper began sporting a high-grade silicone prosthetic belly, custom ordered to mimic the exact weight and feel of a real pregnancy, but physical deception was not enough to fool the Vance family lawyers. My mother leveraged her extensive social connections and a very heavy checkbook to buy off a morally bankrupt doctor at an exclusive, discreet private clinic. Together, they generated a flawless, verifiable trail of forged medical records, fake ultrasound images, and fabricated blood work. To the elite circles of Denver and the Vance family, Harper was glowing and expecting their golden child. However, nature operates on a strict, unyielding timeline. As the months ticked by and Harper's fabricated due date loomed closer, the grim reality of their situation finally set in. You cannot fake the physical arrival of a screaming, breathing infant. Panic began to consume them as they stared down the barrel of a multi-million-dollar fraud exposure. The Vance family demanded to see the heir. In their desperate, twisted minds, they needed a real baby, not just any baby, but one that shared enough familial genetic markers to pass any superficial scrutiny or hushed rumors. That was when their predatory gaze shifted away from their own failure and locked onto the sister they had spent 7 months entirely ignoring. Me, my baby, growing perfectly healthy inside me, became their ultimate prize. I was the one missing puzzle piece required to secure their $50 million payout. They might have executed their plan perfectly if I had been the oblivious, obedient girl I was in my youth, but they severely underestimated what I did for a living. At Vanguard Apex Solutions, my entire career was built on tracing the untraceable and predicting malicious intent. I spent my days hunting subtle anomalies in vast oceans of financial data. One Tuesday afternoon, while running a routine encrypted sweep to test a new risk assessment algorithm, I inputted a few familial data points just to calibrate the baseline security parameters. That was when a glaring red flag popped up on my secondary monitor. I noticed a series of highly obscured, untaxed wire transfers moving continuously from my mother's offshore holding account directly into an anonymous shell corporation. Breaking through the shell company's firewall took me less than 48 hours. The corporate entity belonged to Dr. Eris Thorne, a high-end private obstetrician who catered exclusively to the ultra-wealthy. Why would my mother be funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars to an obstetrician in complete secrecy? I knew Harper was supposedly pregnant through the society grapevines. But the sheer volume of the money screamed bribery, not standard medical billing. I started to dig deeper, meticulously piecing together the timeline. The dates of the massive wire transfers perfectly aligned with Harper's sudden, miraculous pregnancy announcement. I was deeply suspicious, feeling the cold dread of a conspiracy, yet the absolute most horrific truth had not fully materialized in my mind. Just as I was trying to make logical sense of these digital financial breadcrumbs, my personal cell phone rang. It was exactly the first week of my 8th month of pregnancy. The caller ID flashed my mother's name, a name that had been absent from my screen for the better part of a year. I stared at the glowing phone, a cold prickle of profound unease washing over my skin. When I finally accepted the call, I did not hear her usual haughty, commanding tone. Instead, I was met with desperate, heavy sobbing. "Lennon, please do not hang up on me," she cried, her voice trembling with what sounded like agonizing regret. "I have been so incredibly foolish these past months. My heart has been breaking into pieces. I was so wrong to push you away, and I am deeply, terribly sorry for how I treated you. Please, give your mother a chance to make it right." I remained completely silent, letting her theatrical tears flow through the receiver, my analytical mind racing. "I rented a beautiful, private wooden cabin up in the Aspen Mountains for this coming weekend," she pleaded, her tone shifting to desperate warmth. "Harper will be there too. We want to host a private family reconciliation dinner. We want to celebrate you, Wyatt, and my beautiful granddaughter. Just one night. Lennon, let us be a real family again before the baby arrives." Every single instinct honed by my profession screamed that this was a meticulously calculated trap. The timing was entirely too convenient. Landing right at the end of my third trimester, the tears felt intensely rehearsed. Yet, the financial data I had uncovered needed context, and a dark, resolute part of me needed to look my mother in the eye to confirm the monstrous theory taking shape in my head. I hung up the phone, placed my hand on my swollen stomach, and told Wyatt we were going to the mountains. Wyatt was entirely against the idea. "It is a trap, Lennon." He warned me repeatedly as we packed the trunk of our SUV. I knew he was right, but I needed to see the endgame. The drive up the winding mountain roads to Aspen was treacherous, the snow falling in thick, blinding sheets that seemed to isolate us further from civilization with every mile. When we finally arrived at the secluded property, the immense wooden cabin looked like a glowing beacon of warmth against the freezing twilight. Inside, the sheer extravagance was staggering. Crystal glasses sparkled under the warm amber glow of a massive antler chandelier, and a roaring fire crackled in the stone hearth. My mother and sister greeted us with an avalanche of unnatural affection. Harper, sporting her perfectly round, impossibly rigid silicone belly under a designer maternity dress, rushed forward to hug me. It took every ounce of my self-control not to flinch. My mother hovered like a doting caretaker, offering Wyatt premium scotch and pulling out my chair with a sickeningly sweet smile. The performance was flawless, yet the air in the room felt thick, suffocating, and charged with an invisible, electric malice. We had barely finished the first course of dinner when the first phase of their plan was executed. A loud, sharp popping sound echoed from the driveway, instantly followed by the frantic blaring of our SUV alarm. Wyatt immediately dropped his napkin and rushed out into the freezing wind. He returned 10 minutes later, his face pale, brushing snow from his shoulders. He explained that the entire electrical system of our vehicle had completely melted down, completely fried from the inside out. He muttered that it looked like deliberate sabotage, but before we could even process that alarming revelation, his cell phone rang violently. I watched the color completely drain from his face as he answered. The caller claimed to be a head nurse from the Denver General Hospital. They told him his mother had suffered a massive cardiac arrest and was currently in critical condition, slipping in and out of consciousness. The voice on the other end urged him to get there immediately if he wanted to say his final goodbyes. Panic instantly overrode Wyatt's protective instincts. He was completely frantic, tearing his coat from the rack, because our car was a smoking ruin. My mother smoothly intervened, offering a solution with rehearsed precision. She told him the property manager lived just down the ridge and had a rugged winter truck he could borrow to rush down the mountain. Wyatt turned to me, torn and agonized. "I cannot leave you here," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear, but I squeezed his hand, projecting a calm I absolutely did not feel. I told him he had to go to his mother, that I would be perfectly safe inside the warm cabin, and that we would figure out the rest tomorrow. He kissed my forehead, bolted out the door, and within minutes, The roar of the borrowed truck faded into the howling mountain blizzard. The second the red taillights of the truck vanished behind the dense pine trees, the elaborate illusion of family warmth shattered into a million jagged pieces. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. My mother did not say a single word. She walked over to the heavy oak front door and pushed the thick iron deadbolt into place. The loud metallic clack echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. She then moved methodically from window to window, pulling the heavy, blackout drapes tightly shut, plunging the cabin into an oppressive, claustrophobic dimness. The fire in the hearth suddenly felt less like a source of comfort and more like the burning flames of a cage. I stood frozen by the dining table, my hands instinctively wrapping around my 8-month belly. Harper dropped her sweet, welcoming smile, her facial features twisted into a mask of pure, predatory hunger. She slowly walked toward me. Her eyes completely bypassed my face and locked intensely, greedily, onto my stomach. She looked at my unborn child, not with the love of an aunt, but with the cold calculation of a thief appraising a priceless diamond. The silence in the room stretched out, thick and suffocating, broken only by the howling wind outside, until my mother abruptly stepped forward. She reached into her designer tote bag and slammed a thick manila folder onto the center of the dining table. "Sit down." "Lennon," my mother commanded, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth, replaced by the icy authority of a corporate executioner. I did not move. I stared at the folder. My mother aggressively flipped it open, revealing a stack of dense, legal documents bearing the official seal of a prominent family law firm. I recognized the letterhead immediately. It belonged to the Vance family attorneys, a firm renowned for burying their opponents under mountains of expensive litigation. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level, carefully masking the adrenaline surging through my veins. "It is your way out," my mother stated coldly. She tapped her manicured fingernail against the top page. "These are standardized surrogacy agreements. They have been meticulously backdated and legally notarized by people who owe me very large favors. They state that 9 months ago, the Vance family privately contracted you to serve as a gestational surrogate for Harper. It details that you agreed to this arrangement for a sum of $100,000. It explicitly waives all of your parental rights the second the child takes its first breath. According to this paper, the baby in your stomach belongs exclusively to Harper and Julian Vance." My blood turned to ice water. They had thought of everything: the forged medical records, the bribery, the physical isolation, and now, a legal trap. They were going to steal my baby and hide behind an impenetrable wall of fabricated legal documents. They knew Wyatt and I did not have the millions of dollars required to fight the ruthless Vance legal empire in a protracted court battle. They were exploiting our financial vulnerability to orchestrate the ultimate theft. Harper stepped closer, invading my personal space. The scent of her expensive perfume was nauseating in the closed room. She crossed her arms, the rigid, fake silicone belly bumping slightly against the wooden dining table. The sheer insanity of her wearing that prop while trying to steal my real baby was utterly grotesque. "Do not play stupid, little sister," Harper hissed, her voice dripping with venom and absolute entitlement. "You do not need this child as much as I need that trust fund. You and your pathetic husband can always breed another one later. I cannot. My entire future, my marriage, my status, it all depends on what is inside you right now. Do you honestly think I will let you walk away and ruin $50 million for me?" She grabbed a heavy silver fountain pen from her purse and slammed it down violently on top of the forged contract. The metal clattered loudly against the polished wood. "Sign the paper, Lennon," Harper demanded, leaning in so close I could feel the heat of her frantic breath on my cheek. "Sign it right now. When you give birth, you will hand the baby over to me. You will take the $100,000, and you will completely disappear from our lives. If you do not sign it, I swear to God, you will never walk out of this cabin. We are miles away from anyone. The snow is piling up by the hour, and you are completely trapped. No one is coming for you. You belong to us now. I let my breath hitch, forcing my lungs to heave, as if all the oxygen had been violently sucked from the closed room. I stumbled backward, my boots scraping clumsily against the heavy wooden floorboards, purposefully putting a large oak chair between myself and my mother. I wrapped both of my arms defensively around my stomach, curling my shoulders inward to make myself appear as small, fragile, and utterly defeated as possible. "Mom, please," I begged, letting my voice crack perfectly on the final syllable, tears welling up in my eyes. "You cannot do this to me. This is my child. This is your own flesh and blood, your own granddaughter. How could you possibly steal a baby from your own daughter? Please, I am begging you, let me out of here." My mother did not raise a hand to strike me. She was far too calculated, far too obsessed with the ultimate prize to risk any physical violence. After all, she needed the merchandise growing inside me to remain entirely unharmed and perfectly healthy. Instead of hitting me, she moved with frightening, predatory speed, snatching my leather purse from the nearby counter. She dug her manicured hands inside until she retrieved my cell phone, powered it down, and dropped it deeply into her own coat pocket. Then she advanced, backing me into the darkest corner of the dining room. Her presence was imposing, completely void of any maternal empathy I might have foolishly hoped for. "Listen to me very carefully, Lennon," my mother whispered, her tone sharp enough to cut through solid glass. "You will sit down and sign those surrogacy papers right this second, or your precious, perfect Wyatt will spend the next 20 years of his life rotting in a federal penitentiary." I gasped loudly, feigning absolute, paralyzing terror. Harper laughed from across the room, leaning heavily against the dining table with a smug, victorious sneer twisting her face. "Do you really think Julian's family would hesitate to destroy a nobody architect like your husband?" Harper chimed in, her voice dripping with cruel satisfaction. "The Vance family lawyers have already drafted a secondary set of documents. If you refuse to give me what I want tonight, they will orchestrate a massive, inescapable financial frame-up. They will plant manufactured evidence showing Wyatt embezzled $2 million from his latest commercial building project. They own the judges in this state. Lennon, they own the police commissioners. Wyatt will lose his architectural license, his freedom, and his entire reputation. And while he is sitting in a concrete cell, Child Protective Services will hand this baby right over to me anyway, because you will be deemed an unfit, destitute, and homeless mother." They laid out their entire extortion plot, detail by agonizing detail. Completely intoxicated by their own perceived power and brilliance, I let them talk. I let them threaten, blackmail, and boast for another 5 uninterrupted minutes, ensuring every single angle of their criminal conspiracy was dragged out into the open air. Harper was practically glowing with malicious triumph, her fake, rigid silicone belly looking more absurd by the second as she paraded around the room. She tapped the heavy silver pen on the table, waiting eagerly for me to break completely and sign my child away. But the breakdown never came. The frantic heaving of my chest slowly subsided. The fake, terrified tears clinging to my eyelashes dried up instantly. I dropped my arms from my protective stance over my stomach, uncurling my posture until I stood perfectly straight. My spine stiffened with a cold, undeniable authority that filled the shadowy corner of the room. The sudden, drastic shift in my physical body language caused a flicker of genuine confusion to cross my mother's face. I looked directly into her cold eyes, and a slow, completely serene smile spread across my lips. It was a smile so utterly out of place in a hostage situation, so terrifyingly calm, that Harper actually stopped tapping the pen and took a nervous, involuntary step backward. "You both have spent my entire life severely underestimating me," I said, my voice no longer trembling or weak, but vibrating with a chilling, metallic calm. "You always saw me as the quiet, boring shadow, the girl who just sat in the back analyzing boring data, while Harper got to play the glowing, untouchable princess. But you completely forgot what I actually do for a living." I reached up with my right hand and slowly unzipped the high collar of my winter maternity jacket, Pinned discreetly to the dark inner lining, resting right over my collarbone, was a black, circular micro-recorder. It was a piece of proprietary, highly restricted audio surveillance equipment engineered by the Tactical Security Division at Vanguard Apex Solutions. The tiny green light on its surface was blinking steadily, a silent, beautiful testament to its flawless operation. I tapped the blinking light with one finger, locking eyes with my sister. "Did you really think a senior risk analyst would walk blindly into the lion's den without a heavily secured backup plan?" I asked, my smile widening into something absolutely lethal. "Did you honestly believe I would step foot inside an isolated mountain cabin in the middle of a blinding blizzard without securing my own absolute safety first?" The color drained entirely from Harper's face, leaving her looking like a terrified, hollow ghost. My mother stared at the microphone, her jaw slightly parted, her brain struggling desperately to comprehend the massive, catastrophic shift in power. "Let us review the exact facts, just for the official record," I stated clearly, turning my body slightly so the high-definition microphone would catch every single syllable. "Mom, on the 4th of September, you initiated an offshore, untaxed wire transfer of exactly $350,000 to a shell corporation controlled by Dr. Eris Thorne to completely falsify Harper's medical records. Harper, you purchased that ridiculous, high-grade silicone prosthetic belly you're wearing right now on October 14th at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon from a specialized theatrical effects studio located in Burbank, California. You paid using a hidden platinum credit card to avoid Julian finding the transaction. And the exact reason for this desperate, pathetic performance Section 4, Paragraph 2 of the Vance Family Trust, which clearly mandates the production of a legitimate, biological heir by the end of this calendar year to unlock a payout of exactly $50 million. I took a deliberate, heavy step forward, forcing my mother to shrink back against the very wall she had just backed me into. "You did not corner a helpless, terrified, pregnant woman tonight," I whispered, my voice echoing with finality in the silent room. "You just delivered a full, unedited, perfectly audible confession to illegal imprisonment, massive financial fraud, and felony extortion." The absolute silence in the room was shattered by a visceral, animalistic shriek from my mother. The reality of her catastrophic failure finally broke through her shock, replaced instantly by violent, unhinged desperation. She lunged across the dining table, her perfectly manicured hands transforming into claws, desperately reaching for the collar of my jacket to rip the device away. But I was already moving. I took one swift step backward and firmly pressed the small, tactile button located on the side of the microphone. A sharp, high-pitched electronic beep echoed through the room, followed by a steady, solid green light, turning into a rapid, blinking red. "It is already gone," I stated, my voice slicing through their frantic scrambling. "That button was a manual override for a dead man switch I programmed before I even left Denver. The entire audio file from the past 20 minutes, fully unencrypted, along with a massive zip file containing every single forged medical record, banking transaction, and offshore wire transfer, has just been successfully transmitted." Harper grasped the edge of the heavy wooden table, her knuckles turning completely white, her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. "Transmitted to who?" she gasped, her voice barely a hollow whisper. "Did you send it to the police? We can pay the police. We have money." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that held zero humor. "The police were just a secondary recipient on the email," I explained, watching the final fragments of their arrogance evaporate. The primary recipients of that data packet were Julian Vance and the senior partners of the Vance family legal team. I bypassed their corporate firewalls yesterday. Your husband and his army of ruthless attorneys are currently listening to you threaten to frame an innocent man just to steal a baby and defraud them out of exactly $50 million. My mother dropped to her knees, her hands covering her face as a guttural sob tore from her throat. Harper just stood there, staring blankly at the wall, her mind completely short-circuiting as the monumental scale of her ruins settled over her. They had assumed they were playing a simple game of family manipulation, entirely unaware they had just triggered a corporate and legal nuclear bomb. Less than 2 minutes later, the howling mountain wind was suddenly drowned out by the deep, aggressive roar of multiple high-performance engines tearing up the secluded driveway. Piercing, intensely bright white halogen headlights sliced through the tiny gaps in the heavy blackout drapes, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the tense air of the cabin. It was definitely not Wyatt returning with a borrowed winter truck. I heard the heavy, synchronized slamming of at least 8 heavy car doors outside, followed by the rapid crunch of combat boots sprinting across the snow-covered porch. Before my mother could even attempt to stand up, the massive oak front door, the very door she had locked to trap me, was violently kicked open. The heavy iron deadbolt shattered, sending jagged splinters of wood flying across the expensive rug. 3 massive, black armored sport utility vehicles were parked aggressively on the lawn. They belonged to the elite private security detail of the Vance estate. Flanking them were 4 local county police cruisers, their red and blue emergency lights violently painting the snowy landscape. Julian Vance stepped through the broken doorway. He did not look like the polished, charming real estate heir society knew. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire reality burn to the ground. His face was a mask of absolute, terrifying fury. He ignored the tactical security guards securing the perimeter and walked straight past my trembling mother. He stopped exactly 2 feet in front of Harper. Harper reached out a trembling hand, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. "Julian, please, I can explain," she whimpered, her voice completely pathetic. "She is lying. Lennon is crazy. I am pregnant. I swear to you." Julian did not say a single word. He raised his right hand and violently hurled his expensive smartphone directly into her chest. The device bounced off her rigid silicone belly and clattered loudly onto the floorboards. The screen was glaring brightly, displaying the exact forensic financial timeline I had emailed him, complete with a high-resolution photograph of the theatrical supply invoice for her fake stomach. "You disgust me," Julian spat, his voice shaking with a rage so profound it seemed to lower the temperature in the room. "You are completely dead to me. Do not ever speak my name again." As Harper collapsed onto the floor, wailing uncontrollably and clutching her fake stomach, 2 uniformed police officers stormed past Julian. They forcefully grabbed my mother by her arms, hauling her roughly to her feet. Another officer grabbed Harper, ignoring her hysterical screams. "Eleanor Carr and Harper Vance," the lead officer announced, his voice booming with undeniable authority. "You are both under arrest. The charges include unlawful imprisonment, felony conspiracy to commit extortion, and large-scale financial fraud. You have the right to remain silent, which I highly suggest you use." The harsh metallic clicking of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping tightly around their wrists was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. The meticulous, multi-million-dollar illusion they had built to destroy my family was officially dead, and they were the ones wearing the chains. Just as the police cruisers began to pull away, carrying the shattered remains of my mother and sister down the mountain, another vehicle skidded to a halt in the snowy driveway. It was Wyatt. He practically tore the ruined front door off its remaining hinges as he sprinted inside, his eyes wild with terror until they locked onto me. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me so tightly I could feel the frantic beating of his heart against my own. Despite the immense psychological strain of the evening, my baby kicked gently against his embrace, a quiet reassurance that we had survived completely unscathed. My meticulous planning and absolute refusal to be a victim had kept us perfectly safe. The legal and social fallout over the following months was absolute and merciless. Because their plot involved a coordinated attempt to defraud a $50 million trust fund, the local charges were quickly escalated by prosecutors. My mother and Harper found themselves facing severe federal prison sentences for grand financial fraud, conspiracy, and extortion. The Vance family, wielding their infinite resources and furious pride, crushed Harper into the dirt. Julian filed for an immediate, at-fault divorce. He utilized airtight legal clauses to entirely strip her of all marital assets. throwing her out onto the street completely penniless and suffocating under an astronomical mountain of legal debt. Naturally, a scandal of that magnitude could not be contained. The bizarre, twisted story of the fake silicone pregnancy and the isolated mountain ambush leaked to the national media. My mother and sister became the absolute laughingstock of the entire country, universally recognized as the ultimate symbols of grotesque, unhinged greed. Every single one of their wealthy friends and distant relatives publicly disowned them, completely severing all ties to avoid the toxic fallout. While they sat in cold holding cells awaiting their federal trials, my world was finally bathed in warmth. Just a few weeks after that nightmare in Aspen, I gave birth to a perfectly healthy, beautiful baby girl. Today, sitting in the sun-drenched living room of our home in Denver, watching Wyatt gently rock our daughter to sleep, I feel an overwhelming sense of absolute peace. The cruel, calculated lie my mother and sister spun permanently severed our blood ties. But in doing so, it granted me ultimate freedom. I used the undeniable truth to burn their toxic influence to the ground. They taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Family is absolutely not defined by the people who share your blood. Family is defined entirely by the people who will stand by your side and protect you until the very end. Thank you so sincerely for taking the time to listen to my story today. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a message in the comments below. If you found today's story engaging, please consider supporting our channel with just a $1 donation. This small contribution helps us pay our hardworking staff so they can support their families and continue creating high-quality stories for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code right here on the screen or by clicking the donation link in the video description or the pinned comment.